We're going to do three things. One, I'm going to say a few words about Ian Hamilton. Secondly, we're going to talk about Andrew's book, And the Stone of Destiny. And then we're going to talk a little about the stone itself and some of the mystery and the intrigue and the mysticism that lies behind it. I'm going to say a word about Ian Hamilton first because I'm not certain that many of the obituaries I saw did him full justice. Ian was the personification of the word thrawn. Okay? The Aberdeen independence movement would have a dicky fit if Ian was still in the Scottish National Party. Ian actually didn't join the Scottish National Party till he was my age, in 1992. And I like to think he joined it because he thought I was just a little less respectable than my predecessors as SNP leader, who Ian was thoroughly convinced were far, far, far too establishment orientated. And he saw, I think, some germ of salvation in me, that perhaps there was a radical that's trying to get out. So Ian joined the SNP in 1992, and he contested in 1994 the European elections. I saw somewhere that he'd never contested the Scottish Parliament elections. That's rubbish. He contested Greenock and Port Glasgow in 1999. But the example of Ian's thrownness was this. Obviously, he and his Confederates, Gavin, James, and Kate Matheson, repatriated the stone. We hear the BBC constantly talking about stealing it. I mean, as if you could somehow steal stolen property. He repatriated the Stone of Destiny on Christmas Day in 1950 and led the authorities a merry dance, which was wonderfully encapsulated in George Reed's film documentary called The Pinch, which Ian actually loved. But Ian repatriated the stone with his Confederates. But when Michael Forsyth in a wheeze in 1996 thought he could save the Tory faith and salvation in Scotland by whizzing the stone back in great ceremony to Edinburgh Castle, Ian refused to attend. Not only did he refuse to attend the ceremony, but he said he wouldn't be going to see the stone again until Scotland was fully independent. I have to say that's one of the few pledges in his life that Ian didn't keep, because after I wrote the foreword to his book, The Stone of Destiny, in 2008, I managed to tempt him to Edinburgh Castle, where we had a reception for the film The Stone of Destiny, which many of you will have seen. Directed, incidentally, by, you know, the wee accountant guy in The Untouchables, where Sean Connery won his Oscar, right? The guy who played the accountant who brings down Al Capone. That's the guy who directed the Stone of Destiny, and it's a fine film, a lovely film in my opinion. So anyway, we had this reception at the castle, and I tempted Ian along. Ian came along, and we had this most wonderful exchange, because I had this kind of party piece at the castle. I'd let all the guests at receptions go up and see the honours of Scotland, the sword of Scotland, the crown jewels of Scotland, Bruce's gold, and the crown, and the Stone of Destiny. And then whatever curator was on, we'd have a discussion about the stone. Was it the real stone? Was it an imitation? The sort of thing I'm about to speak to with Andrew. But actually that night I spoke with Ian about it. And some of the things he told us that night will emerge during this discussion. So as we start this discussion, let's just have a big round of applause for the iconoclast, the thrawn, the Scottish nationalist and patriot, Ian Hamilton. Now, Andrew Neil MacLeod, The Stone of Destiny. But this isn't just a book about the stone. This is a book which is number 2 in your volumes that you're writing at the present moment, which are kind of bits of a detective story, really. So explain it to us.
Well, this second book, The Stone of Destiny, it starts in a kind of darkened tavern in London where Dr. Johnson is chatting with his best pal, James Boswell, over a bottle of brandy. And they're discussing this idea that you brought to public attention. At first I heard about it was about 10 years ago when you brought this to the public attention, but it's been a kind of theory that's been kicking about in history books for a lot longer than that somehow the Stone of Destiny, the current one at Westminster, now in Edinburgh Castle, was a fake, that somehow Edward Longshanks, who dragged it back with him to England, was duped, and he was fobbed off with a phony. And this is the theory that they're discussing in this tavern, and then these two friends decide to go off on this grand adventure together to recover the true Palladium of Scotland.
But Andrew, you have cast in your series of books, of which this is the second, Dr. Johnson, beloved of the Scots, of course, and the highly articulate diarist Boswell. You've cast him almost like Sherlock Holmes and Watson. Because, I had the great pleasure of reading the first volume of this and did a television programme about it, which was a pretty gruesome but wonderfully written.
Thank you.
But you have Johnson and Boswell like Holmes and Watson. Would that be reasonable?
Yeah, on a kind of superficial level. Yeah, it's obvious to me. I don't mean that, but it's obvious
I'll
to
be
me.
more profound in my next question.
Well, it's an easy hook to hang it on, and it's to get a comparison. But in real life, they were kind of comparable because obviously Dr. Johnson was a polymath, and his best friend and biographer recorded his life. But my character of Dr. Johnson is a bit more fallible than Sherlock Holmes. I always loved Arthur Conan Doyle's stories, but I always found Holmes to be a bit superior and smug. But the thing about Dr. Johnson is he's more well-rounded because he was a real person, of course, and he was fallible. And he was much more compassionate as well, I think, than Sherlock Holmes, who was a very cold, analytical type of person.
So they go out to solve the mystery of the Stone of Destiny.
Yeah.
Now, as most of us here will know, there are two possibilities about the Stone of Destiny, either one of which could take you down the fake. One is the one we're about to discuss, that the Stone of Destiny taken by Edward I, stolen by Edward I, Edward Longshanks, Edward Plantagenet, so wonderfully played by Patrick McGoohan when he flung that guy out the castle in Braveheart. We don't think there's wrong with that. Underplayed Edward. Edward would have had everybody out the castle window. So that he dragged from Scotland a fake because the abbot of Arbroath, abbot of Scone rather, had the foresight not to allow Edward to pin Scotland's most sacred relic. The second theory, of course, is that after Ian Hamilton and his cohorts and colleagues, with the help of Bertie Gray, the stonemason in Glasgow, the councillor, didn't actually return the stone that they had pinched. And what appeared in the high altar of Arbroath Abbey some months later was actually one of Bertie Gray. Where better to hide the Stone of Destiny than a stonemason's yard in Glasgow? Brilliant. Now, that's the two things. So, which one will we deal with first? Let's deal with the ancient one first. Yeah. So how do Johnson and Boswell in your book approach this mystery?
Well, their first port of call is, of course, Scone Abbey to look at the records. I think the abbot at the time, in 1296, was a man called Thomas de Palermo, and so he would have presumably been involved with this switch. So they head off to Scone Abbey to look through the records. And it leads them in a series of clues which they have to follow. It's like an anthology of stories, an anthology of supernatural stories. And each clue leads them on to the next chapter or tale.
Right, can I take the contrary view then? Look, Edward Plantagenet is ruthless. He's a dreadful man, but he's not a dummy. No, he's not going to get fobbed off by a Cludgy stain or a lump of Persia sandstone. He's not a fool. Furthermore, there was 4 members of his retinue who'd been at the crowning of John Balliol, Tomb Tabard. Wouldn't they have said to Edward, excuse me, sir, wrong stone? This doesn't hang up, does it? He's not going to drag a fake all the way to London, is it?
Yeah, well, there's 2 points. First of all, it's quite clear that I think he realised he'd been duped at some stage because, well, first of all, we know that he returned to Scone Abbey exactly 1 year later and tore the place apart brick by brick. And he also tortured several monks to death, if contemporary records are to be believed.
Sounds like our boy.
Yeah. So if he had the stone already, what was it he was looking for? And the other thing is, if he realised that he had the fake stone, he's hardly going to say, is he? Because it would have been embarrassing for him. So he said, this is the Stone of Destiny, and that's where it was.
And hoped that nobody would look at it for the next 700 years.
I think Edward I was aware of the power of propaganda, you know, because he was obsessed with amassing all these religious artefacts and royal paraphernalia. He'd also, before he'd been to Wales, he'd taken their Iron Crown and their fragments of the cross. So it was obvious he was going to turn his sights on Scone Abbey.
One of the reasons, folks, that I've sometimes despaired of some people in the national movement who can downplay history. You know, every successful interloper through the ages, Edward I included, knew and understood the importance of history. If you want to destroy a nation, you destroy its history, destroy its records. And Edward knew that full well, and as you say, practiced it ruthlessly. What about the medieval chroniclers? What did they say about the stone?
Well, that's the thing. It's always been described as a solid block of black marble or meteorite carved into the shape of a throne with curious hieroglyphs engraved around its circumference and a depression on top where the high kings of Alba would sit to be crowned. And yet, when you go to Edinburgh Castle and have a look at the thing, you know, a more ordinary lump of stone you couldn't imagine. It's so unremarkable.
It's nicely lit.
Yeah.
To me, that's the. I don't know what Boswell and Johnson thought, but to me, this is the most convincing argument. If something becomes such a potent symbol, it has to be special. You know, the medieval folk are not that much different from us. You know, if they thought, my God, look at that. It has to be something unusual. And, you know, the Stone of Destiny, I think, is quite nice, but it is a lump of sandstone. Perthshire sandstone, incidentally. But so, for something, and remember, the stone has a history beyond that. No doubt Johnson and Boswell had a look back to the full range of the legend of this stone, the Jacob's pillow and all the rest of it. What do they reckon on that?
Yeah, well, it's a gift for a writer because its history is completely shrouded in mystery. You know, you could trace it back through Egypt to the pillow that the patriarch of the Israelites slept on and dreamed of a stairway to heaven. But there's also an alternative strand where it's more into Celtic and pagan myth that comes from the Irish fair folk, the Tuatha De Danann. And it's called, in that legend, it's called the Lia Fail. And they believe that it was this one of 4 sacred objects that was taken out of their kind of Atlantis-like place that these, if you ever read Irish myth, these people come from. So, yeah, that's it. That's shrouded in mystery. You know, we don't really know its origins. It can only speculate.
See, medieval propaganda, it was really interesting, and the Scots were really good at it. The Declaration of Brough is a superb example, but there are others. And the idea was demonstrating that you got here before the English. Because clearly, if you got to Scotland before the English got to it, then they were the interlopers and you were the legitimate folk. So Scotland had the Egyptian background, that the Scots came from Egypt. And the stone, on one of them, the interpretations supported that. It was a prince of Scythia, wasn't it? Who went to Egypt, got very successful, got to marry the kind of
Queen
pharaoh.
Scotia.
Queen Scotia, yeah. And there they went to Spain and then to Ireland, carrying the stone with them. So obviously it was a big boat, but so they got to, and then from Ireland, obviously, as the Scots invaded Scotland, dealt with the Picts, or merged with the Picts, however you want to describe it, they brought the stone with them to Iona and then to Scone. And it had been in Scone, what, about 400 years before Edward got his mitts on it.
Well, that's the thing. The Scots and English were always in a kind of rivalry about who was the oldest civilization. And, you know, they kind of made up ridiculous things. Like Edward believed himself to be descended from Brutus of Troy. And so the Scots would counteract that and claim they were even older. It became a kind of one-upmanship game.
It was very sophisticated and absolutely brilliant, incidentally. I mean, the only thing the medieval mind lacked was technology. They were absolutely sophisticated. I mean, they could have done some braw election leaflets if they'd had elections. You know what I mean? Absolutely brilliant stuff. So let's go on to Johnson Boswell. Your book comes out when?
Halloween, October the 31st.
Okay. I've got one of the only copies here. So, wow, how did they get on?
With each other?
Yeah, no, I know how Johnson Boswell, how do we go on? I know Johnson Boswell, I know how they got on, but how did they get on finding the stone?
Well, I can't reveal that, but it's the...
Do you want me to rephrase that question? Andrew Neil MacLeod, it's an enormous personal expense. You've come all the way from Dubai here to Stirling. You've got an expectant audience who've been waiting for hours to solve the mystery of the stone. Don't you feel you owe these people something? I've even given them a clue as to what happens in your book.
Well, okay. It's a road novel, so it's the journey that's important.
That's what we say.
And it quite closely follows the real route taken by Johnson Boswell on their tour of the Highlands in 1773. So, like any road novel, it's episodic. So, like I say, it's like an anthology of tales held together by this search for the king-making stone of Scotland.
So you start in a drinking den in London.
Yes.
Is this going through a series of drinking dens in Scotland?
Well, actually, Dr. Johnson didn't drink. He was a teetotaler. He didn't smoke either. So he was a bit of a goody two-shoes character.
So Boswell was having all the...
Yeah, he's having the drink, and Dr. Johnson's doing the talking.
Who was buying?
Well, he was a Scotsman. I don't know. I don't think it's true what they say about Scots being mean. That's a myth.
No. So can I have this book? Now, so they get to... I mean... What do you think, having written the book and obviously done, as we can tell, comprehensive research, what do you think about that? I mean, how important? I mean, I know what Ian Hamilton thought about this. He thought about symbols and deeds. He thought symbolism came to life through deeds, hence the deed he did. What do you think? I mean, where does the stone... rank in terms of, how important was it at the time? How important was it when it was stolen by Edward I? And what do you think about the impact of the repatriation of it by Hamilton and his crew?
Well, I just recently reread Ian Hamilton's novel, The Stone of Destiny, and not to be confused with mine, so you buy them both. Ian Hamilton's books is brilliant.
Ian asked me to write the foreword.
Yeah. I didn't dare to ask. I thought it'd be too forward of me, But I actually watched the movie for the first time. It's a great movie as well. Apart from being a brilliant piece of propaganda for Scotland, it's a great heist movie. And what surprised me about watching it, what really captured me, was the fact that they almost get caught so many times, from staking out Westminster Abbey to getting it across the border. And it would have caused a great deal of embarrassment to all concerned if they were caught with their trousers down, so to speak, in Westminster Abbey. And, not just that, but...
there was the pinch, but there was also the clinch. Yeah. As you may know, that... friendly London Bobby came along with his flashlight and caught Ian and Kay in the act.
That's right.
So what they did was they got into a clinch. What would be your excuse for being in a darkened Westminster Abbey, at 11 o'clock on Christmas Eve? So that's what they did. And the friendly Bobby said, "Oh yes, I understand. Maybe 100 yards up the road."
It's almost like they were guided by the hand of Providence, because the press would have had a field day if they weren't successful, but they were. But I think that was just the first act in a long and brilliant life of Ian Hamilton. He was actually rector of Aberdeen University when I was a student there. In fact, I'm very proud of. And like you say, he was an iconoclast, but he took his job very seriously. And I think a few years later, he was unfortunately outvoted as rector of Glasgow University. in favour of Ross Kemp, who plays Grant out of EastEnders, which leads me to believe that I made the right choice of university.
Any Glasgow graduates, you'll get your opportunity to respond.
Well, we shouldn't be so hard. I'm a Glaswegian myself. We shouldn't be so hard on Glasgow because maybe they were afraid of the scandal because, for example, when the Prince of Wales was offered an honorary degree from Aberdeen University, Ian Hamilton protested in no uncertain terms. I don't want to repeat the words. It wouldn't be unfair to the current monarch. You get done for treason. But it wasn't...
Go on. You're among
okay.
non-obedient people here.
He said, why should we waste a degree in such a social and intellectual non-entity as the Prince of Wales? His words.
So Ian...
And of course,
he never missed the ball, did he? So, listen, lots of luck with the book, Andrew. We're going to throw open to a few questions now, if we can. Are the mics available? This one here, perhaps? No, you've got one there. Good. Now, who'd like to ask Andrew a question or two, or myself, or anything you like about the Stone of Destiny? Ask him what the first book was about, because it was really, really murderous.
I'm just interested in the Blarney Stone. I did go to Cork one time and I kissed the Blarney Stone. It's a big black piece of stone on the castle, complete out of place with the rest of the stonework. And the story is that is where it went. That is the Stone of Destiny.
Right, Andrew. Did we all hear that? Did you investigate that theory?
That it was a piece of black marble, was it?
Gentlemen, just tell us again where you saw this theory.
Yeah, so the Blarney Stone.
The Blarney Stone.
You go to Cork in Ireland, and there's a big castle, and at the top of the castle is a big black bit of stone, which is part of the normal sort of stonework of the building. But the rest of the stone is completely sandstone or something. It's totally out of place being there. And so part of the story that they told us when we were kissing it is that could have been where the people from Scone took the stone to keep it out of the hands of Edward I.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, okay. I understand now. Sorry. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many theories of where the true stone could be. We couldn't even touch on them just now. There's also a carved marble throne. I think it's in Wrexham Abbey that looks very similar to how it's described. Yes, some people say like the Bible phrase, the head cornerstone. There's a few theories about that where it's built into the body of a church, like you say.
That was kind of important, if you had something really sacred, and it wouldn't be unusual to hide it or to place it within another sacred building. That would be, rather than taking it to a cave or something like that, to put it in sanctified ground would be have protection with that. So that would be quite a part of logic if you believe the abbot of Scone hid the stone. A gentleman just there.
When my brother was a wee boy in Springburn, he remembers being on the tram and travelling past this shop that had a picture of the Daily Mail, and it said, "Stone of Destiny stolen." Yes. And he remembers the people on the bus being quite aggrieved at this and saying, "Wait a minute, is that not our stone?" And do you agree that that was a trigger for Scotland to actually feel that they had an identity, and the identity was being stolen because it was such a huge kerfuffle at the time, and they're so much indignant that the Scots had the temerity to steal what they thought was theirs when it was actually ours. It had an amazing effect that people today, I don't think, realise that kind of started off the whole thing and gave a boost to the movement of independence then.
Should you take this one? Will I take this one?
Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, absolutely. The fact that Ian Hamilton and his friends weren't arrested, I think it was to avoid this scandal because they realised, I mean, who does own the Stone of Destiny? I was actually reading a really brilliant article just the other day, and it's on a website called electricscotland.com, which I learn a lot of my history from. And it was from this really larger-than-life character. I think you know, maybe personally, his name's Robbie the Pict.
Yes,
And this is in the mid-90s.
Saved me a fortune in bridge tolls. Great man.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
I felt I had to remove all the rest of them because what Robbie had done.
Well, this article consists of a series of correspondence between Robbie and various members of the British establishment. He starts by writing a letter to Police Scotland, reporting a theft, and the theft is the Stone of Destiny by one Edward Plantagenet from Scone Abbey. And he finishes off by demanding that the stone be returned to its true owners, the people of Scotland. Of course, the police laugh in his face, but he starts firing off other letters. He writes to the Procurator Fiscal, he writes to the Secretary of Scotland, he writes to the Home Secretary, he writes to the Dean of Westminster, he writes to the then Prime Minister, it was John Major, and he even writes to the Queen. And all these letters are persuasive and eloquent, but each time he gets the door closed in his face. So then he makes a very kind of ingenious idea. What he does is he says, okay, we will buy back the Stone of Destiny for the princely sum of £250,000 on the condition that when it comes to Scotland, it's placed on the Isle of Skye. And he's a very interesting reason for that, because at the time, as you well know, there was a huge scandal at the time because I think it was privately owned, the Skye Bridge.
The bridge tolls.
And the toll was exorbitant.
PFI.
So Robbie the Pict's justification was this, at least if people are paying this huge fee, they've got some, apart from the beautiful scenery, of course, they've got something to go and see.
And Robbie, of course, won the battle on the bridge because he discovered that the instrument that Forsyth had put forward for it was unlawful in itself, and they had to reverse the bridge tolls. So he won that particular battle. I wonder what we're going to do now. I was talking earlier on to Andrew about this. Let's say I was still First Minister right now, okay? And I was looking at this so-called agreement whereby a stolen object was returned to Scotland in 1996 on condition that it should be taken back to Westminster for the next coronation. Now, I don't really see that Michael Forsyth was entitled to barter over a stolen object. I mean, I can tell you this, see when the Elgin marbles get returned, as they most certainly will, I don't think there'll be a clause in the agreement saying they get sent back to London, even for a short period. So I must say, I'd have been tempted, given I couldn't say to King Charles III, incidentally, the Alapa Party are abolishing you, so, you know, that's all moot. I think I might have said, look, sir, I don't think it would be appropriate to return stolen property to the place where it was stolen for 700 years. And if you are dead set on a coronation on the Stone of Destiny because you feel that your ancestors and the kings of Scotland and actually none of the Stuart kings, but your ancestors were crowned on it in Westminster Abbey, then if the stone is so important, then couldn't the king come to the stone instead of the stone to the king? Mind you, I mean, scaling down the price of one coronation, 2 coronations might be just a bit much. It would have been an interesting debate to have, perhaps. An interesting idea. I can see the King's private secretary having a fit.
Yeah, well, they probably have to do it in private, I think, because I don't know if you get that good a reception.
Well, you never know.
I'm very loud. Okay.
Oh, well, it's deceptive, people at the back. But what we'll do, no, I'm sure they won't, but you speak and I'll say what you've said,
Right,
okay?
okay. Because I'm a visual learner, because my whole thing is about visions and images.
Yeah, I love your painting.
Oh, thank you very much. But the thing that gets me more than anything else, the thing that you said that just fascinates me, you talked about the way the stone was described ancient, and I heard Alex tell us about this big lump of Perthshire sandstone, right? So what was the old one like from your knowledge? I want to see it in my head.
Right, I know the people at the back wouldn't hear, despite your best efforts. So she's asking about as a visual artist, she's asking about the visual impressions that were communicated about the stone back in the day. When you go under.
See it in my mind.
Yeah. Well, the historian Nigel Tranter actually drew a diagram of how he thought it would look, but you know, he wasn't really an artist. He was a great historian, but he wasn't an artist. That might give you a general idea. And also, I might be wrong, I think it's in Hexham Abbey. There's something very similar to this king-making stone. So if you could just imagine this solid block of white or black marble with maybe kind of Celtic designs around it, and places to put your hand in, a depression on top. You can also look at ancient seals, because these depicted each king being crowned on something very similar to what I've just described. So. Well, yeah, that's how the Chronicles describe. Yeah, maybe it's just been worn down from kings perching their royal arses on it for 700 years. But
you know, there's so many. I mean, if Andrew was quite right to say, I ran the Abbot of Scone replacement story because I think it's right, actually. And what's really convincing is not so much the abbot would have the presence of mind. Although I think if Edward Plantagenet was coming at me with his retinue, I'd go out the road and I'd take Scotland's most sacred relic with me. I think I would have done that. But what really convinces me is, I think there's two references in medieval chronicles, and they both describe it as a black, shiny object. And these things were usually meteorites. You know, they were objects so astonishing that the people went, wow, you know. And I think the counter-argument that, you know, they put a black cloth over it during coronations doesn't seem to me particularly convincing. So I'm for the abbot replacing the stone. Andrew's given great indication of what happened then. Because then you've got to ask yourself, let's move forward to 1328. Robert Bruce is master of these islands. The Treaty of Northampton with Isabella and Mortimer. Remember Isabella from Braveheart? You know? Anyway, she and her lover Mortimer have killed Edward II in unusual circumstances. Whether the English, incidentally, you know how bad the English are. This is a real negative thing about the English, right? They killed their king, right? We won't go into the legend as to how they killed him, because that's a wee bit off at this time of night. They killed their king. They impeached him posthumously after they killed him and said he wasn't fit to be king, and I'm quoting exactly, because he was given to digging ditches and other diverse matters. In other words, he was a gay gardener, right? So that's why they killed their king. And Edward I, you know, Edward II rather, wasn't a bad guy. You know, he wasn't as ruthless as his father or his son. He was a gallant knight and all sorts. He wasn't a great, you know, success in battle, obviously, be it Bannockburn, etc. But he wasn't a bad guy, and that's what they did to him. What a cheek they've got. I mean, I wonder if Charles knows what fate might be. I mean, he's a gardener. I mean, you know, what a risk. So when Isabella and Mortimer signed or sealed or agreed the Treaty of Northampton, one of the provisions of the treaty was the return of the stone. Now, if Bruce had wanted it, he'd just send, you know, Black Douglas down with a few hundred, because he was master of the military situation. He could have gone and got it. So it's always fascinating because why didn't he insist? And that tends to me to support the idea that Bruce knew, and probably Edward I had known, that it was a fake. So he wanted to keep the grievance, but he didn't want to bring it back. And then the answer, and I have to thank Andrew for this, because my puzzle about that has always been, well, wait a minute. Why didn't the Abbot of Scone give it to Bruce? Well, of course, the Abbot of Scone was a loyal supporter of John Balliol. And the civil war of the War of Independence wasn't over. 10 years later, Balliol's son was to invade Scotland with the support of Edward III. So it's not necessary that Abbot of Scone was part of the Bruce loyalists. And secondly, this is where Andrew came in so handy, of course, it's quite possible that the Abbot of Scone and everybody else who knew where the actual stone was got knocked off by Edward I in 1297 when he went back ransacking the abbey. So it's possible that all the witnesses were killed by the guy who was looking for the stone. Did you get that in the book?
No, but, you know, second edition, I could maybe put that in, yeah.
See that? I wanted to write a foreword and he's offering me an addendum. It's unbelievable. Now, any other questions? Because I saw a couple more hands up. Right at the back. It was very difficult with the lights, but gentleman right at the back there had his hand up. No, wait for the microphone. Trust me on this. The microphone's important. Only Kenny McCaskill, when he turned his microphone off in the House of Commons, can still be heard.
Hello. I was just wondering, did you say Wrexham or Hexham? Hexham?
I'll need to look it up. Yeah, I think so.
Hexham or Wrexham? I was just wondering how hard it would be to steal that.
I wish I had Google with me right now. It's just something I noticed the other day. I'll get that. I think it was, yeah. Hexham Abbey.
We could maybe just organise another we venture and
Are
steal
you
up.
suggesting another pinch?
Aye, 100%.
I'll tell you, I mean, listen, we have to generate a few headlines for Alapa. Yeah, Alapa suggests illegal border raid.
Just returning the compliment.
Extreme nationalists in Alapa suggest something really awful. Scottish Daily Express. What an oxymoron that is, incidentally. Scottish Daily Express. Now, one last question. I think I saw a gentleman there.
Yep, hi there.
Hi.
If you're correct and the Abbot of Scone did secrete the original Stone of Destiny, what, if any, are the implications for all the monarchs that were subsequently crowned in Westminster on a piece of, on a Stankstein?
Well, that's very interesting.
Well, the whole idea of
I think this
royalty,
is something that Salvo should know as quickly as possible.
The whole idea of royalty is based on this ritual and symbolism. You know, it creates a whole facade and mystique, you know, and the Stone of Destiny is just one part of that. But I do think if it was proved to be a kludgy stain, as you say, which is the cover for a toilet cistern, you know, it does make me smile, the idea of Edward's heirs being crowned on this, what's effectively a toilet seat. But yeah, there's no way of proving it, or maybe there is. They did do testing, and they did prove it was a piece of Scone rock, which is another
related
piece
to
of compelling evidence.
Yeah,
but yeah, I think it does call into question the legitimacy of their kingship over Scotland, if you want, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, I've been sitting in the wrong state. It's a fascinating point, incidentally, and of course you're quite right. The analysis, the geological analysis, suggested it was very similar to Perthshire sandstone, and that, of course, would suggest a replacement. A, because it's in Perthshire, but B, because you're not going to have the whole legend of the stone and it being brought from Iona by King Malcolm.
Oh, you caught me out there.
Anyway, it's either a Malcolm or maybe an Alexander. Anyway, bringing it from Iona to Scone, you wouldn't kind of bring it from Iona to Scone, lose it, and then substitute it. So that tends to support the substitution by the good abbot of Scone. Well done, him. We'll make him the next honorary life member of Alapa, posthumously. Now, listen, I did promise you at the very start of this that I could solve one aspect of the mystery. Because Ian, when I persuaded him to come to that reception in Edinburgh Castle to kind of go back on what he previously had said, we had a similar debate to the one I've been having with Andrew. I can't remember which side I was on. I kept reversing it. But Ian was terrific. But I did ask him to say one thing to the assembled audience that night, and that was to confirm or deny that the stone in Edinburgh Castle is the same stone that he repatriated from Westminster Abbey. And Ian said it was. So that aspect, the substitution by Bertie Gray or person or persons unknown, on Ian's word, and that I would accept as definite.
So it's not a fake of a fake.
It's not a fake of a fake. I think it's an original fake, not a fake of a fake. Ladies and gentlemen, as we've heard, this book is coming out on Halloween. And I think it's going to be required reading for all members of ALAPA and many, many other people across Scotland and across the world. Can you put your hands together and thank Andrew Neil MacLeod?
Thank you so much. Why am I clapping? I was clapping you.
Now, very lastly, Andrew appeared on a certain television programme a couple of years back to talk about the first. Just give me a wee second, you know, and then I'll come down. Andrew appeared on a certain television programme a couple of years back to talk about the first of his novels of Johnson and Boswell. What was the title? It's a real brilliant title.
The Fall of the House of Thomas Weir.
The Fall of the House of Thomas Weir, yes. Blood-curdling stuff. It's wonderful. Make sure you read it. But he did, I think justifiably mentioned to me that because he'd been down the line from Dubai, he didn't get, as the guests in the studio got, one of the quaichs, which went with the show. So I've got enormous pleasure in today making good and presenting you with an Alex Salmond Show quaich.
It's a huge honour. Thank you very much. Thank you so much.